I can't control God.
It's a risk you're taking, you know?
I can't control the wind or God.
Start
So then
watching 5 seconds before.
then I will call out the tour director. But I'm just saying that if the wind blows, there's nothing I can do about that. I can't control God. Talk to him.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the Body Serve. I'm Jonathan.
I'm James.
This is a special TBS drugs presentation.
Like the universe does not want us to wrap the men's season at all. Like it keeps getting pushed back.
The other day when this happened, I was in bed. I'd just woken up. You early risers in the world knew way before I did. Opened my phone, saw a few notifications, one from a group chat with you and I and somebody else, that it was just unmistakable what was going on.
Right.
And I just put my phone back down. You asked me later in the day, were you surprised? It's like, no, this is tennis. I've learned now to expect anything in tennis.
Yeah.
So all this is to say, we are here because of Iga Swiatek and what had happened to her the last quarter of the tennis season. We're also here to say thank you to everybody who's donated to or recently launched GoFundMe thus far. We are almost at 25% of our goal, which is awesome. Thank you all. Like you said on the previous episode when we were launching it, if you donate $100 or more, you will be eligible for this year's version of our postcard, as well as bookmarks. Now, I don't know where we're going to land on the image for the postcard this time around.
Oh, I already have something in mind, so we'll see if we both agree on it.
No, I know what you have in mind,
Oh.
and I don't necessarily agree with it.
Okay,
I think
fine.
we're going to have to negotiate on this one. Previously, we were just using our logo on the postcard. Last year was the first time where we used a photo from our tennis travels. And where were we in that photo?
That was Berlin. This past year we have...
More specifically...
at the Steffi Graf Stadion in Berlin.
Yep, thank you.
This year we have Charleston, Miami, Toronto, or New York to choose from. Mm-hmm. Toronto's out.
There are a couple photos that I really love, but unfortunately they're depicting people that I can't really support in using for a mass TBS mailing.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
You know, they've kind of fallen out of favor with us.
Okay. If you would like to donate to our GoFundMe this year, please head over to our Linktree at linktree.com/thebodyserve. And links are also on our Instagram and our Blue Skies. I've got to get used to saying my new Blue Sky. It's the same as the old one, but still.
I have no underscore in mine.
Fancy. Let's get to the reason why we're here.
The reason for the season.
We don't traditionally do emergency episodes, but this is as close as you're going to get. A Wednesday of this week, November 28th, many of us woke up to the news that Iga Swiatek had been charged with anti-doping rule violations for the presence of this drug called trimetazidine. Don't know how to say that.
I was outside practicing. It took me 10 tries before I thought I was even in the correct vicinity of pronouncing that word.
I feel that these are, generally just made up words with too many syllables. So if you're an English speaker, where do you put the emphasis?
Trimetazidine.
That's what I said, I think.
Okay.
Anyway, this drug is a prohibited substance that was found in her urine sample taken on August 12th of this year in Cincinnati, right before the tournament started. It was found in the concentration of 50 picograms per milliliter, which you might remember is a picogram is 1/1,000,000th of a gram.
I did not remember that. So thank you for bringing it back.
I couldn't remember if it was billionth or trillionth. This news was released to a lot of confusion, a lot of surprise on the internet, and it certainly wasn't what I was expecting this late in the season. But I think what's best is let's go through the facts. It was only a 12-page report, so it didn't take that long to go through. Explain what exactly happened, why the suspension was suspended, for lack of a better word, and restarted later in the season, and what some of the fellow players are saying and what it says about the sport's anti-doping procedures as a whole.
Picture it. August 12th, 2024, Cincinnati, Mason, Ohio.
Iga Swiatek is woken up at like 6 in the morning.
Yeah, very early in the morning to do doping control. I have always maintained that behavior is rude AF. To be waking somebody up in the early... well, I guess they do provide a window. They consult to the window, right?
Well, but it's when can you guarantee you're going to be someplace? That it's difficult for an athlete to specify that.
I don't know if I could do it. I simply don't.
Oh, no, I wouldn't, couldn't, and wouldn't. But she's woken up early in the morning.
Important part of that is, she says, we'll get further into it later on, but part of her defense states that she was tired and she didn't put the melatonin on the form that she has to fill out every time she's tested because she was tired. It was 6 a.m. in the morning and she had just started taking it. And who among us thinks of melatonin, those of us melatonin users, think of it as something that's noteworthy?
Mm-hmm. This is just the facts, ma'am. Okay, I don't know where you're going with all this editorializing. You sound like a doping sympathizer is what you sound like.
I just want to give context so it doesn't read, just like a timeline of events.
Yes. When the doping control officer knocks on the door, you have to give the sample. In this case, it was a urine sample. And you also have to complete your doping control form, which is a list of all the medications and supplements that you happen to be taking at the time. Iga listed 14, and it turns out that the one she says is responsible for the positive test, she did not list on the form.
The substance in question, TMZ, what is that?
It's a metabolic modulator. Didn't know what that was.
Well, I do. It means that it helps the body metabolize fatty acids, which allows more blood flow to the heart. It's used for angina and other heart conditions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This drug has been the subject of a few kind of high-profile doping cases. The biggest one was around figure skating at the Olympics in 2022. A Russian figure skater tested positive for this drug, and as a result of a lot of attention on the substance, there has been a lot of scientific research done into it, and it can be used by athletes, especially in longer endurance sports, with the idea that it'll generate better cardiac output, but scientific research is showing that it's probably not likely to have a direct impact on a figure skater's performance, for example. So the science is still kind of iffy on whether and how much this drug is performance enhancing. Nevertheless, it is a prohibited substance.
Right, but that caveat that you just issued as to why it might not be the best doping choice for figure skaters tells me that it could be a good doping choice for tennis players because they need the endurance.
Right. It's still in the could category as far as science is concerned. There was also a story that came out earlier this year that happened at the 2021 Tokyo Olympics, but did not come to light until April of 2024. 23 Chinese swimmers tested positive for TMZ in low concentrations a few months before the Olympics. At the time, WADA determined that the use was inadvertent and there had been a contamination in a hotel kitchen. The issue here is that happened. Some of those athletes won gold medals, and the positive tests did not come to light for 3 years.
What was being cooked in that kitchen? Tortellini?
Right.
The timeline of the events here with Iga, we mentioned that the test that she took was on August 12th of this year. Exactly a month later, September 12th, she's informed of a failed test and issued a mandatory provisional suspension. September 14th, 2 days later, she responds to the notice, denying the charge, and requests analysis of her B sample. 5 days later, September 19th, the ITIA informs Iga that her B sample is also positive.
Remember that doping offenses are strict liability offenses, which means they're proven just by virtue of the presence of the prohibited substance. The ITIA doesn't actually need to prove where it came from. That burden is on the athlete.
September 22nd, 3 days after Iga is made aware that the B sample is also positive, she files an appeal within the 10-day deadline. If that deadline had passed, the test would have been publicly disclosed. This is one of the main issues and talking points that has emanated from this whole scandal. And we've been talking about it for months now. Why are some things private? Why are some things public? Who decides what is told to whom and when is stuff made public? What is the imbalance in tennis, the unfairness in tennis based on your ranking when this stuff happens?
Well, and is there one?
Right. In that first appeal, she denied knowingly using TMZ, but hadn't been able to identify the source yet. 3 days later, on the 25th, the ITIA says there isn't enough evidence to lift the suspension, and you want to know why at this moment is the suspension not publicly disclosed.
Right. This might have been a logical time to publicize it. In previous cases, that had been the case. Like, I think the disclosure rules have fluctuated a bit over the years. But how it works currently is that if a player admits the rule violation and accepts the consequences, decides not to appeal, then the ITIA issues a decision immediately and then publicly discloses that decision.
That seems pretty straightforward.
Right.
The alternative in that situation, if we have a player that's just going to accept the decision, the alternative would be to disclose it even sooner. Right? To be saying, immediately alerting the bat phone from the drugs lab and sending out a press release and then telling the player.
So I have no issue with that part of the rule.
Right.
However, pretty much everybody appeals. So if the player appeals, then the appeal has to be reviewed. Then the decision is shared with the player. Then the player has to accept the decision, and only then is it finally made public. So this is what happened with Iga's case. She was notified on September 12th. She appealed. It took time for the ITIA to analyze the evidence she gave, and finally the public wasn't made aware until November 28th.
And this is what people commonly refer to as a silent ban.
Right. And it is not a silent ban. Like, a silent ban is actually when someone serves the suspension in secret, and the case is fully resolved before we know. And I understand the confusion there because Jannik Sinner technically served the suspension of like a few minutes back when he was first suspended.
I mean, but it is at a certain point a silent ban because we don't know about it.
Sure, but we know about it now. The problem is you had players serving silent bans in the 90s and we never knew about it. Okay. There are very clear rules that govern what is disclosed and when. So that's not a difference in treatment. And we'll get into that a bit later.
On the 26th of September, Swiatek added more submissions to her appeal with expert analyses. The ITIA agrees to test the product in a Salt Lake City lab.
And actually, this might be a good time to talk about the type of evidence that Iga submitted. At this point, by the 26th of September, she had been able to identify what she believes the cause of the contamination was, right? At the time when she first filed the appeal, she's like, I didn't do this, but I haven't figured out what caused a contamination. Now she knows that it's this melatonin product that she purchased in the EU, and as evidence, she sends a lot of stuff, right? She shows that it was classified as a medication in Poland, that it was made by a reputable brand. She explains that she's been consulting a physician since 2019 for sleep issues. She was able to explain how and when she used the product. She had receipts, bank records, photographs, a statement from her psychologist, Daria Abramovich, who is the one who actually purchased the product for her. She even got the opened container that she used, plus an unopened container from the same batch tested in labs in both Paris and Strasbourg, and had the results sent to Salt Lake City.
Preempted the ITIA, saying, not only am I offering this as the source of contamination, but I'm proving it on my end, and then you're going to do your testing and corroborate as well. Does Terramore have that money to do that?
Right, so
To send to 2 different labs in 2 different European cities to then send it over to Salt Lake City. Like, that is...
Right, so this is an example of where the rules are the same, but the outcomes are not going to be the same depending on who you are and the resources you have access to. After receiving all this stuff on October 1st, An independent tribunal recommends that they defer the determination and they lift the suspension while they continue analyzing what Iga has sent in, while they do their own analysis of the product. And just 3 days later, they've lifted the provisional suspension as they investigate, but they haven't come to a conclusion yet. She's allowed to go back and play.
For me, what came in really clutch here was having that second unopened bottle from the same batch. That is really key evidence.
Yeah. October 4th, the day they lifted that suspension, happens to be the same day news broke that she was splitting with her coach, Tomasz Viktorovski. While all this is happening, she's withdrawing from tournaments, from Seoul, from Beijing, from Wuhan, all with a different reason.
In Seoul, it was physical condition, Beijing, personal matters, Wuhan, coaching change.
And this is kind of the part that I don't love, I don't think is really a best practice. It's that somebody is allowed to serve this provisional suspension and withdraw from tournaments just by saying, yeah, it's whatever. I'm going to make up a reason.
I mean, what can you do?
Well, there are other options.
Depending on who's involved. At what point is the WTA made aware?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm sure the ITIA doesn't care about that part of it.
Right.
And if you're going to be changing the way people can withdraw from tournaments specifically because of doping suspensions, then you're kind of giving it away. It boils down to, again, at what point should this stuff be made public, if at all?
Mm-hmm. A week later, the ITIA has sent their formal charge letter, and then on October 23rd, Iga responds. She's admitting the rule violation, but disputes the, quote, applicable consequences. And then finally, on the 27th of November, the ITIA releases the report, which said Iga bears no significant fault or negligence. That falls short of no fault or negligence. Mm-hmm. And that she has been given a 1-month suspension. Very confusing, that. People were rather confused by the 1-month suspension because it's unusual that you see someone serve suspension non-consecutively, and the remaining week on her suspension is served in a week during which there are no tournaments for her to play.
Now I'm sitting here listening to you say that, and I'm assuming a lot of people listening at home will have the same question. Why does Iga Swiatek in this situation have no significant fault, but Jannik Sinner had no fault whatsoever?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And I think this is the source of a lot of people's frustrations with the doping program. It's that the difference between degrees of fault is a matter of degree, right? It's a matter of opinion, and it's for people versed in anti-doping law to decide. We are not those people, right? So we see conclusions and we're like, that doesn't really smell right to me, but we're not legal experts.
I don't know. By this point, you're a paid legal expert
on
the body serve. People are here for your expertise.
Mm-hmm. But to answer your question, what's the difference between no fault and no significant fault? The question is asked, how far did the player depart from their duty of utmost caution? Right? A player has this duty of caution to make sure that they don't ingest anything that is prohibited.
The athlete must show that they took every step available to avoid the violation, which is what they claim Jannik did, and that they could not have done more. So in this case, they're saying that Iga could have done more to prevent this from happening. Mm-hmm. And it bends credulity to me in some spots. Based on the drug cases that we've seen in the last few years, specifically that we've covered on the show, that are often obtuse, very convoluted, a lot of moving parts. This one seems pretty straightforward, to me at least, as a layperson.
Sure. To establish no significant fault, it's kind of a lesser burden, but still a very, very high burden. The athlete has to show that even though they failed to take certain available steps, the circumstances were exceptional and that failure was not significant. Now, the outcome may be significant, but their failure to take those steps wasn't. The key difference, I think, in the ITIA view is that Iga knowingly took a supplement, and with that you accept a degree of risk because supplements have been known to be contaminated. Mm-hmm. Jannik did not knowingly ingest something.
He
right?
outsourced the expertise of somebody else to be responsible for this stuff. And the rub down that he got contaminated him, and he couldn't have done anything about it.
Right.
That's what they're saying.
So the ITIA, they had already established that we believe on the balance of probabilities that Yannick's story is plausible, that it's more likely than not to have happened, and therefore, like, he wasn't seeking out a supplement. And that's the standard you have to pass first, right? They believed his story. You may not.
Mm-hmm. Basically, the ITIA is saying, look, if you're taking supplements, you should know that there's a chance of some kind of contamination. And you as a player should be what? Conducting your own batch tests.
That was a new one, yeah. So that was one of the reasons that they didn't rule no fault or negligence altogether, is because, yeah, you're taking a supplement and you're accepting that there's risk in that, even if something is deemed a medication and is made by a reputable company. But as a player, you know that batch testing is actually something that's available to you, and you should have done that. Which I feel like, we ask a lot of players in the anti-doping protocols, and that I feel like is kind of unrealistic.
Oh, is it?
I don't know, do players, are they expected to submit every single product they take to batch testing? And is that something that's available to them?
Right, but if...
unless you have a lot of money? I honestly don't know.
No, but I'm saying this actually seems a convenience for players. You have access to these batch-tested products. Oh, well, I think I should take some melatonin. Call somebody up and say, hey, can you send me some of that batch so I know for sure I have no issue here.
Okay, if that's available.
And if it's reasonable, yeah. Where I think it's unreasonable is to say, well, Iga could have selected a melatonin product which had been batch tested for anti-doping purposes, or alternatively, she could have had the product batch tested herself. I feel like that is the step too
so
far.
the second one. Okay,
the
so
second
the first
part,
one is reasonable.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
Because you told me that this USANA thing...
Well, we're being told by players that, through the WTA's agreement with USANA, there are a number of supplements available through them. So, I mean, I'm sure there is still a small risk of contamination, but at least then you could say, I literally bought it from who the WTA told me to buy it from,
I mean, that'd be the one time the WTA issues a statement saying, I do not, in fact, stand behind our player.
Right. But in general, the ITIA accepted that the player had shown enough evidence that based on a balance of probabilities that the TMZ was caused by a contamination. That means it's not intentional. And then the question is, what is the degree of fault? And that's what we were just talking about. Once they figure out the degree of fault, then of course you got to figure out how long should the suspension be, if there's one at all. The standard, if it's a first-time violation and unintentional, the anti-doping program provides for a 2-year suspension, but that's subject to further mitigation, meaning that if you're found to have no significant fault or negligence, it can be reduced by up to 100%. That's all of it.
And so for Iga, it wasn't 2 years. They landed on a period of ineligibility of 1 month with credit for time served, which was 3 weeks. And so she had 1 week left to serve after she'd been allowed to compete once the ban was provisionally lifted. And in that time, we saw her compete at the WTA finals. We saw her at Billie Jean King Cup. And now, that last week, it'll expire on the 4th of December. So she's currently serving it as we speak.
Right.
She's serving that final week of her 1 month ban.
So if she had wanted to play any ITFs, she is shit out of luck. One thing I thought was interesting from the report is part of her evidence was that this supplement is classified as a medication in Poland. And the report said multiple times that the classification that something is a medication is not really a factor in anti-doping. But in the very next paragraph, paragraph 48, they say that the player perceived a lower risk of contamination because the product is a medication. And that weighed into how they view the case. I'm like, what? What does that mean? You literally had just said medication doesn't really matter as far as doping is concerned. You see these things in a lot of doping reports, and I guess I have to chalk it up to not being enough of a legal expert to... I mean, I understand the distinction logically, but it feels like they contradicted themselves. Anyway.
The ITIA says that no results are disqualified for Iga because the sample was taken out of competition. Cincinnati hadn't started yet. Now, this seems a little bit weird.
Okay, this is another thing. The report literally said no results are disqualified, and then Ben Rothenberg came back the next day and say, actually, they clarified with me, Cincinnati is being disqualified. Mm-hmm. Very confusing language.
And so Iga will lose the prize money from Cincinnati as well as the 390 points for making the semifinals. And now what does the WTA do? Because in losing those points after the fact, when we do the math, if she had lost them in the moment, Aryna Sabalenka would have reascended to number one sooner than she eventually did. And in fact, is now a week in arrears in her career as WTA world number one. And how is this going to be adjudicated? Is it just going to be washed over, set aside, like the ATP did with Jannik Sinner and said, well, can't be bothered? Or is the WTA going to say, well, here's your extra week, Aryna?
I have a feeling she's going to be in arrears for the rest of her career. I do not think they're giving her back that week at number one.
We still could have the possibility where WADA or Polada, which is the Polish Anti-Doping Association, they could file an appeal, like WADA has done with Jannik Sinner. For now, Iga Swiatek has accepted the ruling. She's not going to appeal further. And if she has her way, by that I mean if she can just put it behind her, then we'll hear nothing more of it. But WADA could say, hey, I don't agree with this, and we're going to be relitigating this again like we're doing with Jannik Sinner. Mm-hmm. At which point, Iga could then launch another appeal.
Yes, she cannot appeal right now, but she is allowed to cross-appeal if either of those doping agencies further appeal the case. Back on Thursday, I think I said Wednesday earlier, it was Thursday when this came out, I wrote down a bunch of, I guess, discussion questions that even after reading the news, I still had questions and I knew they were things we were going to be talking about. My first question was, why isn't the suspension consecutive? And why can you serve a suspension during the off-season?
I think the timing here just so happens to be the off-season. By the time they finish with their ruling. Had this test occurred in May, then it would be made public and Iga would then possibly have to miss Wimbledon.
Right. Just because of when it happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
so
this opens up, skepticism in the process for, people who are bad-minded and the like, who will say, well, of course she got to choose when she got to play and when she got to be suspended. She got to choose a favorable outcome as much as possible for herself.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if I were very cynical, I would have said, oh, she probably wanted to pull out of those tournaments anyway. It gave her a rest or whatever. But the point is, like you said, they don't actually look at suspensions based on missing tournaments. It's actually just based on time. So it feels illogical to me, like from the outside looking in, but it's just time. Mm-hmm. And the reason that it's being served non-consecutively is because, like we said earlier, the ITIA decided that the appeal evidence was compelling, and while they conducted further analysis, they decided to lift it.
So at that point, is it that they don't know if it's going to be no fault at all or no significant fault?
Yeah, I think that's it.
They know it's a possibility that they could still level a 6-month suspension. And so if that happens, what about the tournaments that she played in the interim? What about the money and the points from the WTA finals? Can they retroactively say, well, we're going to say that you were suspended for that week?
I don't think so. I mean, they unilaterally lifted the suspension because they felt like the evidence was good enough. I guess they could have come back and said, well, we still feel like you need to serve 3 total months, and that's going to start now.
Which is why it's weird to me, Because you're saying that the ban is incomplete, but yet she was banned, and then you provisionally lifted it to say, go do your thing. Go keep those points and money, but you can't keep those from prior.
Yeah. It's weird.
It's
right?
weird
It
to
is,
me.
again, like, to be clear, it is within the rules, but it is weird for observers.
Is the contamination story plausible? Is it more plausible than tortellini? Is it more plausible than Brazilian beef? Is it more plausible than Pamela? Is it more plausible than a contaminated open wound rubdown?
Mm-hmm. The beef was Colombian, first of all.
Ooh.
But it's a fair question. Iga submitted a mountain of evidence to show that this was genuine contamination, and I'm inclined to believe it from what we know, like from what we've been allowed to know. It seems like the contamination story is plausible here, but you would be forgiven for being skeptical because every time an athlete tests positive, they claim it's contamination, right? This one happens to be more credible than most.
For me, where I believe it is because of the second unopened bottle from the same batch. When I read that part of it, I was like, oh, okay.
And the ITIA went on record and said, we found TMZ in this supplement, right? Unequivocally. That will rear its head in a few minutes when we talk about another former number one player who was suspended.
I wonder who that is.
We talked about when, one of my big questions was, first of all, what are the rules around releasing to the public what happened? And so now that we know the rules, when should they? And I don't think that I have a clear answer on that, but I think it's worth thinking about.
Unheard here and on the cutting room floor is you trying to say public disclosure 6 times
I cannot.
Before you landed on releasing.
And you know what? Sometimes you just don't go back to the well again. You just give up and move on.
This part is tricky for me. It's tricky because there's a balancing act between a player's privacy, especially when we don't know if an actual violation has taken place. Somebody's career, somebody's reputation is on the line here.
Right.
Because we know this sport is littered with haters. Dark-sided people who will believe the worst about people because they don't like them, because they've done bad things to their fave. Listen, if Angie Kerber had tested positive in 2012, I'd have been like,
Very believable, right? And Taylor Fritz was talking about that this week on Twitter. But yeah, fans tend to believe what they want to believe about their favorites and the people they don't like.
And so, even if somebody's eventually found most likely as believably innocent as one can be, it's still there. It's still going to be on your Wikipedia page. This is a thing that happened. It's something that you went through. It's been a punitive situation, emotionally, financially, all those things. Even if you come out of it as best as one can possibly hope. Right? So the public disclosure part about it, I understand why a player would want this completely under wraps.
Forever?
I'm saying I understand why a player would want
sure,
that.
I'm sure they would love it to be under wraps.
Right. We're also balancing the quote-unquote integrity of the sport, the integrity of the doping process. And what is the best way to keep that transparency in a way that maintains an equilibrium of both? The integrity of the sport as well as a player's best interest and their right to privacy. These are medical records, factually.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Because the best way to make something transparent and out in the open is just show light on it, right? And it's a correction from when they used to do this stuff behind closed doors, when athletes served serious suspensions, and we never heard a thing about it until they retired or sometimes even died. With Yannick Sinner, he was found to have no fault, but there will be a lot of people forever who think he's a doper. But I think at some point, this does have to be released because, sure, fans to some extent deserve to understand that the processes are fair, but more importantly, other players find out about these things when we do, right? Because these are private up until the point that it's publicly disclosed. And it's really, really important that other players maintain trust in the system. And so by having these things go down in secret, that really erodes a lot of trust and belief that the system is applied equally to everybody.
I say this half jokingly, but you know that whole win predictor thing that they have in tennis with the percentages? We hold that we will never know 100% sure whether somebody's innocent or guilty in these situations, right?
Right.
We'll never be able to say unequivocally, innocent, guilty. So let's have an innocent needle as a matter of official record. I mean, you look at me as if I'm a lunatic. But if in this
like
case...
based on algorithm or...
whatever the scientists decide to put into the algorithm, Iga may be 88%. And it falls within an excellent credit score.
Yeah. I can't imagine how that could be abused.
I mean, you find some kind of scientific way to input the data, not based on, like, American Idol votes.
Mm-hmm. Which could be more valid, to be honest.
Oh, my God. I nominate you for the role.
This last question, we've touched on it already. Why didn't Iga take something that's available through the USANA partnership with WTA, for example? And Tara Moore brought this up. She said players have all of these supplements available to them through this partnership. Why didn't she get that? Or why didn't she order something straight through the WTA? They would have sent it to her right away. That I, of course, cannot answer, but Tara Moore has been very vocal lately, as she always is when a doping case comes up, and honestly, her grievance is more legitimate than pretty much every other player talking about this.
Specifically one is who comes to mind.
Well, no. I was also talking about Nick Kyrgios, perennial pick-me Eugenie Bouchard, you know. As I said, like, players deserve to have trust in the system. Any player should be able to voice their discontent as long as it's founded in fact, which frequently it's not. But Tara Moore is one of the players who probably has good reason to be mad.
She did let us know that the PTPA is partnering with King and Spalding Law to offer pro bono counsel to players in anti-doping matters. Now, this is actually a great idea.
Yes, and this is not the responsibility of the tour, in my opinion. I don't think the WTA should be funding those things. So if the PTPA is going to make itself useful, that's actually a really good area to do it.
They have been useful, James.
Yes, I've heard.
Luggage. I think you're also referencing the WTA's statement once this news came out, right?
Yeah. Okay, you can read it, but I want to bounce back to Tara Moore.
The WTA issued a statement saying that they acknowledge the decision, a whole paragraph on that. They also say, the WTA fully supports Iga during this difficult time. Iga has consistently demonstrated a strong commitment to fair play and upholding the principles of clean sport. And this unfortunate incident highlights the challenges athletes face in navigating the use of medications and supplements. We remain steadfast in our support for a clean sport and the rigorous processes that protect the integrity of competition. We also emphasize that athletes must take every precaution, blah, 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 blah. We'll continue to work closely with our athletes to provide education and resources that empower athletes to make informed decisions and maintain the highest standards of integrity in our sport. I mean, reasonably, what did you expect the WTA to say? This is their years-long number one at this point.
Yeah. Someone is going to be mad no matter what the statement is. My thing is, when this WTA says, the WTA fully supports Iga during this difficult time, that's not your job to me. You moved anti-doping to an independent organization for a reason. You should not be involved at all. A player admitted to an anti-doping rule violation, regardless of what happened, I don't think you should say, oh, we support them. This, to me, underlines the deep conflict at the center of the ATP and the WTA. They were founded as players' associations, but now they also represent the tournaments. They're a tour. That you can't cleanly do both. Mm-hmm. You're not a union.
At the very least, they shouldn't be saying difficult.
Right.
We support Iga at this time.
Difficult, why?
Yeah. Are you editorializing there? Or you could just not say anything. You could just issue a statement saying, we are aware. Thank you.
Trust the process. Right? Getting back to Tara Moore, though, I know we talked about this when the Halep decision came out, but what happened was that in 2022, she tested positive for boldenone, and this case has been dragging on for years. The ITIA suspended her. Then she appealed it to the independent tribunal, which found no fault or negligence. But the entire process, just to get that far, took 19 months. Now, the ITIA is appealing the decision to CAS. Interestingly, Tara also didn't get the courtesy of being able to appeal in private. When the report came out, her suspension was made public even before she was able to request the B sample, which is a difference versus the Swiatek case. We've seen cases of contaminated beef with that specific drug, boldenone, which is not a very common prohibited substance in actuality. And it, when it happened to Robert Farah, they were able to prove that it was because of the meat. It was explained as contamination. Regardless of the ruling, again, it's like, why did it take so long? Why has this been going on for 2 years for her? And for other players, it's resolved very quickly.
I think this is going to be a hot take, but I think if an independent tribunal says we're going to reduce something, just let it be. The person's name has already gone through the mud. They've already served some time. Why is the ITIA now here to come and mess up your life even more? What is their interest at that point? You've already made an example of somebody. You yourself will never be able to know the full 100 of what's going on. Mm-hmm. It's based on a balance of many probabilities.
Right.
So why are you coming back now to say, let me fuck with Tara Moore somewhere?
Right. Well, it's what WADA has done in the Sinner case, right?
Yes.
But for growing up as an American, it's counterintuitive because, let's say the state brings charges against you and you are acquitted. The state can't appeal that, right? It's done. The state failed in its ability to prosecute you. In anti-doping and in a lot of different legal systems around the world, both sides can appeal.
Right, but the ITIA is not a person.
Right, but the state is not a person either.
Okay. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, yes.
I feel like you're being unnecessarily contrarian.
No, isn't it the same legal principle? I'm not trying to be contrary.
Okay. I'm just saying I think it should be over at that point. Period.
Perhaps. I mentioned this obliquely, but Simona Halep got online and wrote a whole thing. A true flight of fancy.
There's another word that you could use. Starts with D.
A diatribe?
Delusional.
A fabrication? Delusional, perhaps? Defamation? That also starts with a D.
She took to Instagram and it was just a lot of ranting. I'm sitting and trying to understand, but it's really impossible for me to understand something like this. I can't find and I don't know there can be a logical answer. Is it just that the ITIA just wanted to destroy my career? The gist of what she's saying. I always believed in good. I believed in the fairness of the sport. I believed in goodness. It was painful, is painful, and maybe the injustice that was done to me will always be painful. How is it possible that in identical cases happening around the same time, the ITIA have completely different approaches to my detriment? Identical cases,
Identical.
James. Identical.
Identical. Do you want to talk about why these cases are not identical?
Well, Iga got a 1-month ban, and Simona was reduced from 72,000 months to 9 months.
Yeah. There was a biological passport charge that she claims was completely fabricated.
A pure invention.
A pure invention, out of thin air. CAS decided to take a few blood samples out of evidence, and therefore the biological passport case collapsed because there wasn't enough to tell it. It was pretty close there for a while. The blood samples were not made up out of whole cloth, okay?
It's almost as if she doesn't realize how bad this could have gone in the opposite direction.
Yeah. The other thing is she was found with a much, much higher concentration of the alleged contaminant in her system. She admitted that she didn't really take any steps to find out if this supplement could be contaminated. She didn't discharge her duty of utmost caution. There's that word again. She also did not have an explanation at the ready, as Iga and Yannick did. There are a lot of reasons these cases are quite different, and I think comparing herself to Iga or Yannick makes her case look even worse. At this point, I think maybe your one grievance is that it took a long, long time.
Right.
But I think you actually got off pretty easily.
And it's not enough to say, I didn't do this intentionally. I hope we're beyond that when thinking of and talking about anti-doping in sport, and in this case, tennis. Simona believes in her clean, pure soul that she didn't do this. But in tennis and in professional sport, doing this means many things. And at this point, it cannot be that difficult a concept to grasp. I have a friend who would always say, if a concept is simple, grasp it. This concept is not necessarily simple, but it's been around for so long for her that she should have arrived in the vicinity by now.
Mm-hmm. That post to me, it felt unhinged. Like it really felt like someone not deeply rooted in reality.
Well, it was also translated from another language.
Okay.
I mean, certain words could have...
Do they use more exclamation points in Romanian?
I'm just saying it may read less unhinged in its original language.
Obviously, it's really important for her to maintain that she would never knowingly do something like this. And that's fair, right? That's fair to want to preserve that reputation. But where it falls apart is where you say, my case is the same as these other ones, and I've been sorely mistreated, and I just don't think the facts bear that out.
Do you know who is the winner of this situation?
Who?
Darren Cahill. A doping situation that he was not involved in.
Well, phew, right? We're ending a year in which 2 world number ones tested positive for banned substances. What the hell is going on? It's not something that happens often, ever, historically, right? Any top player testing positive for a banned substance. Since the ITIA took over testing from the ITF, 3 world number ones, current or former, have tested positive. So something to kind of keep an eye on going forward is like, well, why? First of all, what is causing these positive tests? Is the testing better? Is it too sensitive? Is the process more sophisticated? Or are players being reckless because they know it'll probably be overturned? Like, what is going on? So for next time, those are the things that we're thinking about going forward.
Thank you for joining us for this special presentation. It felt a lot less serious. The stakes felt lower to me in talking about this stuff.
I guess.
For this specific instance.
Well, it's kind of like been there, done that.
Also, I feel like this one we have more clarity than in others, which helps us not have to sit on the fence as much.
Sure.
If you've enjoyed this episode, if you love James's drugs work over the years.
There's been a lot of it this year. Contaminated with Questions was a first foray on the Simona news.
If especially that's the part of the body serve that you enjoy the most and you are inclined to support, donate to our GoFundMe and write in parentheses, like a memo on a check, drugs.
Right. I mean, if
you
want to send me to law school, I can do that too.
Thanks again to everybody who's contributed so far. You can find everything body serve related, including our socials and the link to our GoFundMe at linktree.com/thebodyserve. Our next episode will be our ATP wrap, probably being recorded tomorrow. Maybe not released in as quick a succession to this one. We maybe give it a couple days to breathe. So look out for that.
On Blue Sky, I'm Elliot JMR, 2 L's, 2 T's.
No,
you're supposed to say that.
No, but I think we're just... we have to still do it.
Yeah.
Because it's part of our thing.
Yeah.
2 L's, 2 T's. You should go to tennis tournaments with that on your back.
I don't think so.
On Blue Sky.
And you are?
I am, but I didn't do the 2 L's, 2 T's. Do it again.
I'm Elliot JMR on Blue Sky.
2 L's, 2 T's. And I'm Jonathan, Tennis John, Jon, on Blue Sky.
We are at the Body Serve. Thanks for listening.
Till next time.
Thank you very much.